At Morixa Tales, we believe in the power of storytelling. Our scripts weave together deep emotions and dramatic turns to deliver justice where it is most needed. Experience captivating mysteries where the truth eventually shines through, leaving a lasting impact on your heart and mind.
I sat alone at the defendant's table. My husband sat across from me with his lawyer pointing at me and laughing. She can't even afford an attorney. This should be quick. I folded my arms, silent. When the courtroom doors opened, he went pale and froze. Everything had changed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our story. If you're enjoying this content, consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a comment below to let us know where you're tuning in from. Just a quick note, this story contains fictionalized elements woven in for narrative and educational value. Any similarities to actual names or places may be coincidental, but the lessons within could be meaningful to you. I sat there with nothing but hope, dressed in a gray thrift store dress I'd owned for 6 years. Across the aisle, Jordan adjusted his $4,000 suit and laughed like he'd already won, and maybe he had. The courtroom was cold that March morning. Not just temperature cold, though the heating system in Riverside County Superior Court clearly hadn't caught up with spring. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you realize you're utterly alone. Courtroom 7 smelled like floor wax and old wood and fear, my fear specifically. I could taste it in the back of my throat, metallic and bitter. 9 years. 9 years of thinking love meant accepting less than I deserved. 9 years of Jordan's voice in my head telling me I was lucky he stayed. 9 years of shrinking myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared completely. And now, here I was, sitting at the defendant's table with nothing. No lawyer, no files, no glass of water. Just my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles ached white. The empty chair beside me felt like a spotlight. Everyone could see it. The court stenographer Barbara Green glanced at it with something like pity. The bailiff officer James Cooper, a heavy-set man who looked like he'd seen too many divorces, shook his head slightly when his eyes passed over my empty table. But across the aisle, Jordan had everything. Gregory Walsh sat beside him, all silver hair and sharp eyes, reviewing documents with the calm of a predator who'd already cornered his prey. Jordan leaned back in his leather chair, checking his watch. An Audemars Piguet. I knew because he'd told me 100 times how much it cost. More than most people's cars, he liked to say. More than I'd ever be worth. He caught me looking and smiled. Not a nice smile. The kind of smile that made my stomach drop. "She's late," Jordan said to Gregory loud enough for the few spectators in the back rows to hear. His voice carried that tone I knew too well, the one that said he was enjoying this. Or maybe she finally realized it's cheaper to just give up. I looked down at my hands. Photographer's hands, Jordan used to call them back when he still pretended to like my work, before he started calling it a hobby, before he made me sell my cameras to pay rent after he froze our accounts. My accounts, I reminded myself. He'd made sure there was no "our" anymore. All rise. Officer Cooper's voice jolted me back to the moment. Everyone stood as Judge Harold Matthews entered through the door behind the bench. He was older, maybe late 60s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of no-nonsense expression that said he'd heard every lie the legal system had to offer. The judge's black robe settled around him as he sat. We sat, too. The sound of bodies returning to wooden benches echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Light filtered through tall windows, pale and weak, like it was afraid to fully enter this place. Judge Matthews opened the file in front of him. Case number 24-DV0091, Pierce versus Pierce. We're here for the preliminary hearing regarding division of assets and petition for spousal support. His eyes scanned both tables, then stopped on mine. The empty chair beside me seemed to grow larger. "Mrs. Pierce." The judge said, his voice echoing slightly. "I see you're alone. Are you expecting counsel?" I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold me. "I am, Your Honor." My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "She should be here any minute." The sound that came from Jordan's side of the courtroom wasn't quite a laugh, more like a bark of derision. He covered his mouth with his hand, but the mockery was unmistakable. Judge Matthews' eyes cut to him. Is there something amusing, Mr. Pierce? Gregory Walsh stood immediately, placing a restraining hand on Jordan's shoulder. The gesture looked protective, but felt controlling. I'd seen that hand on Jordan's shoulder before at dinners and business functions. It meant, shut up and let me handle this. Apologies, Your Honor, Gregory said smoothly. My client is simply frustrated. This process has been unnecessarily prolonged, and the emotional strain is significant. Keep your client's frustration silent, Mr. Walsh, Judge Matthews warned. He turned back to me. Mrs. Pierce court began 5 minutes ago. You understand the rules. If your attorney is not present, she's coming. I insisted, hearing the desperation creep into my voice. There was traffic. Traffic, Jordan muttered, but this time he didn't bother covering his mouth. He wanted me to hear. He wanted everyone to hear. Or maybe the check bounced Chloe. Oh, wait, you can't write a check. I made sure of that this morning when I canceled your last credit card. The words hit me like a slap, but they weren't surprising. Nothing Jordan did surprise me anymore. That was the sad truth I'd learned too late. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I'd given him 9 years of second chances. Mr. Pierce. Judge Matthews banged his gavel once. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Jordan stood up, buttoning his jacket with theatrical humility. My apologies, Your Honor. I just want to be fair here. My wife is clearly confused. She doesn't understand the complexity of family law. She has no income, no resources. I offered her a generous settlement last week, $75,000 and the 2018 Lexus. She refused. He turned to look at me directly. His eyes were cold, dead almost. Eyes I'd once thought were beautiful. I tried to help you, Chloe, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. But you insisted on playing games. Now look at you, sitting there with nothing. You don't have a lawyer because nobody wants a charity case. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, I'd been breaking for 9 years. This was different. This was the moment when you realize you're either going to drown or start swimming, and there's no one coming to save you. Except maybe there was. Did I make a mistake calling her? The question had haunted me for 3 days ever since I'd sat on Rachel's couch, sobbing into my phone and dialed the number I'd sworn I'd never call again. We hadn't spoken in 9 years. Not really. Just polite holiday texts and birthday cards with no return address. But when Rachel told me there was only one person who could stop Jordan, I'd known she was right. The question was whether Eleanor Sullivan would come, whether she'd choose me over him, whether a mother could stand against her own son. Mr. Walsh. Judge Matthews said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. Is your point that Mrs. Pierce is unrepresented and we should proceed with a default judgment? Gregory Walsh smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd won before the game even started. Your Honor, while my client's passion is regrettable, his point is valid. We are wasting the court's valuable time. Mrs. Pierce clearly has not secured representation. She's had months to prepare. Under the precedent of Vargas versus State, we move to proceed immediately with default judgment on asset division. Judge Matthews looked at me. He looked tired, like he'd seen this story play out too many times. Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Walsh is technically correct. The court's time is valuable. If you cannot produce an attorney right now, I have to assume you're representing yourself pro se. And given the complexity of the forensic accounting involved in your husband's estate, that would be inadvisable. I'm not representing myself, I said. My voice came out stronger this time. Please, just 2 more minutes. She's coming. She's stalling, Jordan hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. She's got nobody. Her family's gone. Her friends are suburban housewives. Who's she going to call? He laughed again, that barking laugh that used to make me flinch at dinner parties. Now it just made me angry. Your Honor, Gregory pressed, sensing the kill. I move to strike her request for continuance. Let's end this charade. Judge Matthews sighed, a deep, weary sound. He picked up his gavel. The wood felt heavy in his hand. I could see it from where I sat, could see the way his fingers tightened around the handle. Mrs. Pierce, he said, and his voice was almost gentle, almost apologetic. I'm sorry. We cannot wait any longer. We will proceed with—" The gavel rose. Time seemed to slow down. I watched it arc through the air, heading toward the sound block. In that moment, I saw my entire future homeless, penniless, exactly where Jordan wanted me, broken and begging him to take me back. He'd said as much to Rachel, laughing over coffee, thinking it was funny. The gavel was halfway to the sound block when the courtroom doors didn't just open. They burst inward with a force that rattled the frames. The sound exploded through the room like thunder. Every head turned. The judge's gavel froze mid-air. Jordan's smile faltered. Gregory Walsh's pen stopped moving, and my entire world shifted. I couldn't see who was standing in the doorway yet. The light from the hallway behind them was too bright, creating a silhouette. But I felt something change in the air, something electric and dangerous and final. Jordan's face had gone completely white. "No," he whispered. Just that one word, barely audible, but I heard it, and I knew. She'd come after all. The woman who walked through those doors wasn't just a lawyer. She was a force of nature in a white suit that probably cost more than my car used to be worth before Jordan took that too. I hadn't seen Eleanor Sullivan in person for 9 years, but even from across the courtroom, even backlit by the harsh hallway fluorescence, I recognized the way she held herself. Like gravity worked differently for her, like she could bend the world just by standing in it. She removed her dark sunglasses with one hand. Slowly, deliberately. The gesture wasn't for practicality. The courtroom wasn't that bright. It was theater, and everyone in that room became her audience. Her eyes were the same piercing blue I remembered, the kind of blue that could read a contract and find the lie buried in subsection C, the kind that could look at you and know exactly what you were afraid of. Silver hair cut into a sharp bob that probably had its own standing appointment at some D.C. salon I couldn't afford to walk past. The white suit was tailored so precisely it looked like armor, and behind her 3 junior associates moved in formation, carrying leather briefcases that looked heavy enough to contain entire legal precedents. Lauren Adams was one of them. I recognized her from the photo on the Sullivan and Monroe website I'd stared at for 2 hours before making that phone call 3 days ago. Young, efficient, already walking with the confidence of someone who'd learned from the best. The click of Eleanor's heels on the marble floor sounded like a countdown, each step deliberate, each step carrying the weight of 25 years of Supreme Court arguments and Senate hearings and corporate mergers that reshaped industries. I'd called her from Rachel's apartment at 2 a.m, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't think she'd answer. We hadn't really spoken since my wedding day when she'd stood in the back of the church, wearing that same expression she wore now, like she was watching something die but was too polite to say so. "I'm sorry," I'd whispered into the phone that night. "I know we haven't talked. I know you didn't approve, but I don't have anyone else, and he's going to destroy me." There'd been a long silence, then Eleanor's voice crisp and awake despite the hour. "Give me 3 days." And now here she was. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the heating system seemed to hold its breath. Officer Cooper's hand had moved to his belt, an instinctive reaction to sudden movement, but he lowered it when he saw who'd entered. Judge Matthews sat straighter in his chair, his expression shifting from irritation to something close to reverence. But it was Gregory Walsh's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. He dropped his pen. Actually, dropped it. I heard it clatter against the table, watched it roll toward the edge and fall to the floor. His mouth opened slightly, and for just a second the shark lawyer disappeared, and what was left looked almost afraid. He knew who she was. Everyone in legal circles knew Eleanor Sullivan, the Iron Gavel they called her. 14 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, 112, constitutional law, corporate mergers worth billions. She didn't just practice law, she shaped it. And she'd just entered Riverside County Superior Court like she owned it, which in a way she did now. Eleanor walked past the gallery benches, past the bar divider, straight to the defense table. She didn't look at me. Not yet. This was business first, always business first with Eleanor. She stopped 3 feet from Jordan's table and turned. Just turned. Didn't speak. Just looked at him with those blue eyes that had made senators sweat under television lights. The smile she gave him wasn't kind. It was the smile a hawk gives a mouse right before the dive. Jordan had gone from white to gray. The expensive tan he'd gotten last month in Cancun on marital funds, I'd later learn, had disappeared under a layer of shock. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His hands gripped the edge of the table. "No," he said again, louder this time, still barely audible. "That's impossible. You wouldn't. You can't." Eleanor's expression didn't change. She turned away from him, dismissed him really, and addressed the judge. "My apologies for the timing, Your Honor." Her voice filled the room without being loud. It was the kind of voice that had commanded boardrooms and courtrooms for decades. Confident, precise, terrifying in its calm. I had to file several emergency motions regarding Mr. Pierce's finances. It took longer than expected to compile all his offshore holdings. Offshore holdings. She said it so casually, like she was mentioning the weather. But I saw Jordan flinch like she'd struck him. Judge Matthews leaned forward. His entire demeanor changed. "Counselor, please state your name for the record." Eleanor reached into her jacket pocket. Even that movement was precise, and withdrew a gold-embossed business card. She walked to the stenographer's desk where Barbara Green sat with wide eyes and placed the card down with the same care someone might use handling evidence. "Eleanor Sullivan," she said, returning to stand at the defense table. "Senior Managing Partner at Sullivan & Monroe, LLP, Washington, D.C. I am entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant." She let that settle for exactly 3 seconds. I could feel the weight of it, the shift in the room's atmosphere. Gregory Walsh had gone pale. Jordan looked like he might be sick. Then Eleanor turned her head and looked directly at him, her son, the child she'd raised and then watched from a distance for 9 years. The man who'd married me and then spent nearly a decade trying to break me. I'm also his mother. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Someone in the gallery gasped. Officer Cooper's eyebrows shot up. Judge Matthews removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, like he needed a moment to process what he'd just heard. But I barely heard any of it. My brain had stopped working. Wait, she's his mother. Not just my lawyer, but his mother. The room spun slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. 9 years ago, Jordan had told me his mother was too busy to come to the wedding, that she was in Europe for a case, that she'd send her regards and a check. He'd never said her name was Eleanor Sullivan. Never mentioned she was one of the most powerful attorneys in the country. Never told me that when I met her briefly at Christmas dinners and Thanksgivings during those first 2 years, I was sitting across from legal royalty. He'd kept us separate on purpose. Of course he had. Because if I'd known who she was, if I'd known what she was capable of, I might have called her years ago. Eleanor finally looked at me. Her expression softened barely just at the edges, and she gave me the smallest nod. Then she pulled out the chair beside me and sat down, placing her briefcase on the table with a decisive thud. She was really here, sitting beside me, about to fight for me, against her own son. Jordan found his voice. It came out strangled and desperate, and nothing like the confident mockery from 5 minutes ago. Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son." The courtroom went silent again, everyone leaning forward. This was better than any television drama. This was a family destroying itself in real time. Eleanor turned in her chair, slowly, the way a queen might acknowledge a peasant who'd spoken out of turn. Her face was carved from ice. "And she's my daughter-in-law," Eleanor said. Her voice was colder than winter frost, colder than the March morning outside, cold enough to kill. "And you, Jordan, are a criminal." The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Criminal. Not my son who made mistakes. Not a man in a difficult situation. Criminal. Gregory Walsh stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Your Honor, I must object to—" "Sit down, Mr. Walsh." Judge Matthews didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "I want to hear what Miss Sullivan has to say." Gregory sat. He had no choice. Eleanor opened her briefcase. The sound of the latches clicking open sounded like a cell door closing. She pulled out a stack of documents thick enough to stop a bullet. "Your Honor," she said, Before we proceed, I need to address the several inaccuracies in the financial affidavit Mr. Pierce filed this morning. Inaccuracies that I believe constitute perjury under state law. Perjury. Another word that settled over the courtroom like fallout. Jordan made a sound. Not quite a word. More like air escaping from a punctured tire. He looked at Gregory Walsh with desperate, pleading eyes, but Gregory wouldn't meet his gaze. The shark had smelled blood, and it wasn't coming from my side of the room anymore. Eleanor glanced at me one more time, and this time she smiled, just slightly, just enough for me to see. It was the smile of a woman who'd spent 3 days and 72 hours preparing to dismantle her own son's life piece by piece, lie by lie. It was the smile of someone who'd chosen justice over blood, and I realized in that moment that I wasn't alone anymore. I had Eleanor Sullivan, and Jordan had just realized he was completely, utterly, devastatingly screwed. I watched my mother-in-law, my lawyer, place the briefcase on the table between us. It looked heavy enough to contain every secret Jordan had ever buried, and from the way his face had drained of color, I suspected that's exactly what it held. Eleanor didn't sit. She stood at the defense table with the posture of someone who'd argued before the Supreme Court and won. Someone who knew that commanding a room wasn't about volume, it was about certainty. Your Honor! Eleanor began, her voice carrying effortlessly. Mr. Walsh filed a motion for default judgment claiming my client has no assets and no representation. Both assertions are now moot. She placed one hand on the briefcase. Everything Eleanor did was calculated. Furthermore, Mr. Pierce claims the assets in question are his sole property, protected by a prenuptial agreement executed 9 years ago. Jordan leaned toward Gregory Walsh, whispering urgently. I could read his lips well enough. Do something. Stop her. But Gregory's face had gone pale. Eleanor reached into the briefcase and lifted out a bound document. She walked across the aisle and placed it on Gregory Walsh's table. The sound it made wasn't loud, just a soft thud. But in that silent courtroom, it sounded like a cell door slamming. That prenup, Eleanor said, turning back to the judge, is void. Jordan exploded. That's ironclad. She signed it. Her name is right there on page 12. Mr. Pierce. Judge Matthews didn't raise his voice. Sit down and be quiet, or I'll have Officer Cooper remove you. Jordan sat, but his hands gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles went white. Eleanor removed her reading glasses, folding them with deliberate care. Theater. Beautiful, terrifying theater. Mr. Pierce, she said, looking directly at him, do you know who wrote the standard template for the spousal coercion statute currently used in this state? I did, in 1998. I know that law better than almost anyone alive. She turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A. From her briefcase, she produced a document with a blue backing sheet. The bailiff carried it to Judge Matthews. This is a sworn affidavit from my client executed 3 days ago. In it, Mrs. Pierce details the circumstances under which she signed the prenuptial agreement. My throat went dry. I'd sat on Rachel's couch 3 days ago and told Eleanor everything. Judge Matthews was reading now. His eyebrows climbed higher with each paragraph. According to this sworn testimony, Eleanor said on March 14th, 2014, the night before their wedding, Mr. Pierce appeared at Mrs. Pierce's hotel room at midnight with a prenuptial agreement she had never seen before. I remembered that night. The hotel room, my wedding dress hanging on the closet door. Then the knock came. Sign this, he'd commanded. I'd read the first page. My hands started shaking. Jordan, this says I get nothing if we divorce. Then don't divorce me, or I can call everyone right now. Tell them the wedding's off, that you're unstable. Your choice. My grandmother's care facility. That's on you too. You think I'll keep paying for that if you embarrass me? I'd signed with shaking hands. According to the affidavit, Eleanor's voice pulled me back. Mr. Pierce threatened to cancel the wedding, publicly humiliate Mrs. Pierce and withdraw financial support for her grandmother's nursing care facility. Judge Matthews looked up sharply. He threatened to cut off an elderly woman's health care. Her grandmother had Alzheimer's, Eleanor said quietly. She passed away 6 months after the wedding. But that night, Mrs. Pierce believed she was choosing between her marriage and her grandmother's life. My eyes burned. I would not cry, not here. Your Honor. Gregory Walsh stood up, sweat beading on his upper lip. We haven't had time to review this affidavit. We weren't notified. An ambush, Mr. Walsh. Eleanor's smile was glacial. You tried to secure a default judgment against a woman with no legal representation, while your client publicly mocked her in this courtroom. You don't get to complain about fairness now. She reached back into her briefcase. Another document. Thicker. Exhibit B, Your Honor. Text messages from Mr. Pierce's phone sent March 14, 2014. Retrieved from Cloud Backup Services. Gregory Walsh's face went from pale to gray. Judge Matthews was reading the messages now. His jaw tightened. Mr. Pierce. The judge said slowly, did you send a text to your brother stating, got her grandmother's nursing home as leverage. She'll do whatever I want now. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Gregory Walsh was frantically flipping through the documents. I could see the exact moment he realized the prenup was dead. His shoulders sagged. Your Honor. Eleanor said, under state coercion statutes I helped write a prenuptial agreement signed under duress with threats involving family welfare and public humiliation is void. It never existed in the eyes of the law. Eleanor let that sink in. Let Judge Matthews finish reading. Let Gregory Walsh realize he'd built his entire case on a contract that was about to disappear. Then she turned back to the judge, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop. Something colder. Something that said the prenup was just the appetizer. Your Honor. Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a register that made everyone lean forward. The invalid prenup is merely the foundation of my argument. Now let's discuss what Mr. Pierce has been hiding during this marriage, what he's been systematically concealing from my client, and as of this morning from this court. She placed both hands on the briefcase. Let's talk about the $32 million Mr. Pierce forgot to mention in his financial disclosures. The courtroom erupted. The noise in the courtroom didn't die down. It swelled like a wave crashing against the oak walls. I sat frozen watching Jordan's face drain of color, not the pale white of shock, but something worse. Ash. The gray of something burning from the inside out. Eleanor didn't wait for silence. She never did. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second folder, thicker than the first bound with a heavy black clip. The kind of file that doesn't just contain documents, it contains consequences. Your Honor. Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the murmur like a blade through fog. If I may direct the court's attention to the financial affidavit filed by Mr. Pierce this morning. Judge Matthews leaned forward. I have it in front of me, Miss Sullivan. Then you'll note, Eleanor continued, that Mr. Pierce has declared his net worth to be approximately $12 million. Impressive, isn't it? Gregory Walsh rose halfway out of his seat. Your Honor, I failed to see the relevance. Eleanor didn't even look at him. The relevance, Mr. Walsh, is that your client is lying under oath. The courtroom went silent, the kind that comes right before someone pulls a trigger. Judge Matthews set down his pen. That's a serious accusation, Counselor. It's a documented fact, Your Honor. Eleanor lifted the second folder. This is the forensic accounting report compiled by my team over the past 72 hours. Lead investigator Emma Richardson, certified fraud examiner with 18 years at the Treasury Department. Eleanor opened the folder. The pages inside were dense, covered in highlighted numbers, charts, wire transfer records. She didn't read from them. She didn't need to. Mr. Pierce has systematically hidden assets through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent business structures. The primary vehicle, Pinnacle Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware but operating accounts in Bermuda and Panama. My hands went numb. Bermuda. Panama. Words I'd only ever heard in movies about drug cartels and mob bosses. Your Honor. Eleanor said, the actual value of Mr. Pierce's holdings is not $12 million. It's $32 million. The courtroom erupted again. Judge Matthews just sat there staring at Jordan like a man watching a house collapse in slow motion. $32 million. I couldn't breathe. I thought about the grocery receipts I saved, the coupons I clipped. The time I asked Jordan for $60 to replace a broken camera lens, and he told me we couldn't afford it. He had $32 million hidden in accounts I didn't know existed, and I was buying clothes from thrift stores. Ms. Sullivan. Judge Matthews said slowly, his voice cold, "Are you telling this court that Mr. Pierce committed perjury in a sworn financial disclosure?" "Yes, Your Honor, that's exactly what I'm telling you." Gregory Walsh shot to his feet, his face flushed. "Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated allegations." "They're bank records, Mr. Walsh." Eleanor's voice didn't rise. "Authenticated, time-stamped, cross-referenced with international financial disclosure databases. Your client funneled marital assets into offshore accounts over 5 years, misrepresenting income, fabricating business losses, and using shell companies to obscure the money trail." She turned to Jordan. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked directly at him, and the expression on her face, it wasn't anger. It was something colder. "You made this too easy, Jordan," she said quietly. Jordan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing on a cliff edge in the dark. Gregory Walsh sat back down, his hands trembling. Even sharks know when the waters turn to blood. Judge Matthews folded his hands on the bench. "Mr. Pierce, did you sign the financial affidavit submitted to this court this morning?" Jordan's voice came out hoarse. "Yes." "And did that affidavit list any offshore accounts, any holdings in Bermuda or Panama, any company called Pinnacle Holdings, LLC?" Silence. "Mr. Pierce," the judge said again, "I need you to answer the question." Jordan swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor, it didn't." "And why not?" "Because," Jordan's voice cracked, "because those accounts are business investments. They're not marital assets." Eleanor tilted her head like she was listening to a child explain why the sky was green. "Your Honor, Pinnacle Holdings was funded entirely through income earned during the marriage, Mr. Pierce used joint funds money that my client contributed to through her work, her sacrifice, her labor, and funneled it into private accounts without her knowledge or consent. That's not a business investment. That's embezzlement." The word hung in the air like a noose. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet, but something close. A crack in the wall I'd been pressed against for 9 years. Judge Matthews leaned back, his jaw tight. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm going to need copies of this forensic report submitted by end of business today, and I'm going to need Mr. Pierce to explain under oath where this money came from and where it went." Eleanor smiled, small but carrying the weight of a verdict. "I'd be happy to facilitate that, Your Honor. In fact, I'd like to call Mr. Jordan Pierce to the stand." Gregory Walsh's head snapped up. "Your Honor, that's highly irregular." "Irregular." Eleanor's voice turned sharp. "Your client lied to this court under penalty of perjury. I think the court deserves to hear him explain why." Judge Matthews nodded slowly. "I agree. Mr. Pierce, you'll take the stand after the lunch recess. We'll reconvene at 1:30. He banged the gavel once. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. My chest ached, but I wasn't alone anymore. I had Eleanor, and Eleanor had 32 million reasons to make Jordan Pierce tell the truth. Jordan turned in his seat, his eyes locking onto mine for just a second. And in that second, I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. I'd imagined Jordan on the witness stand 1,000 times during those sleepless nights. In my fantasies, he crumbled immediately, broke down, confessed everything, and begged for forgiveness. But reality doesn't work like fantasies. Jordan stood up from the defense table and walked toward the witness stand like a man walking into a boardroom. His chin was high, his shoulders were square. He still thought he could talk his way out of this. He'd been talking his way out of things his entire life, out of speeding tickets, out of bad business deals, out of promises he never intended to keep. Why would today be any different? Officer Cooper stepped forward holding a worn black Bible. Jordan placed his left hand on it, raised his right, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I almost laughed. Almost. He sat down in the witness box, adjusting his tie, smoothing the front of his jacket. The same suit he'd worn to our wedding, navy blue, tailored to perfection. I used to think he looked handsome in it. Now all I could see was a man playing dress-up. Eleanor stood at the podium. She didn't bring any notes, didn't carry a legal pad or a folder or a single piece of paper. She didn't need them. She just looked at him. Her son. The man she'd raised, fed, clothed, sent to private schools and Ivy League universities, and she looked at him like he was a stranger. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice calm and steady, "let's talk about the accounts you forgot to mention. You claim they're business investments, so tell the court, what business are you in?" Jordan shifted in his seat. His hands gripped the edges of the armrests. Good. Let him feel what I felt. "I'm the senior vice president of business development at Pinnacle Holdings," he said. Eleanor tilted her head. "A company you own. I'm the majority shareholder, yes. So these aren't investments. You paid yourself from marital income, hid it in a private company, and then moved it offshore." "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" Eleanor's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Yes or no, Mr. Pierce? Did you use marital funds to fund Pinnacle Holdings?" Jordan's jaw tightened. "The financial structure of the company is complex. Yes or no?" "It's not that simple." Eleanor turned to Judge Matthews. "Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect that the witness is refusing to answer." Judge Matthews nodded slowly. "So noted." I watched Jordan's face. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He wiped it away quickly, but I saw it. And so did Eleanor. She moved closer to the witness stand, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. "Let's talk about what you did with some of that money. On March 3rd of last year, you purchased a luxury condominium in Miami, title held under Pinnacle Holdings, LLC. Jordan cleared his throat. "That's an investment property." "Interesting." Eleanor pulled a single sheet of paper from her blazer pocket. She didn't hand it to him. She just held it up. "Because your credit card statements show purchases for nursery furniture, a crib, a changing table, a rocking chair, all delivered to a condo registered under your shell company." The air left my lungs. "A nursery." I pressed my nails into my palms so hard I thought I'd draw blood. My vision blurred at the edges. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. We lost our baby in 2017. I was 4 months along. We just started telling people. We'd picked out names. I'd bought a onesie that said, "Worth the wait," in tiny blue letters. And when I lost the baby, Jordan told me he didn't want to try again. Ever. He said it was too painful, too risky. He said we didn't need kids to be happy. And now he was buying nursery furniture for someone else. Eleanor's voice cut through the fog in my head. "Mr. Pierce, were you planning to rent that condo to families with infants?" Jordan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Or was that nursery for someone else? Someone who's 28 years old and had no idea you were married? The courtroom went silent. Jordan's hands were shaking now. I could see them from where I sat. His knuckles were white, his fingers trembling against the wood. Gregory Walsh was on his feet, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there, his mouth half open like a man watching a train derail in slow motion. "Your Honor." Eleanor said, "I'd like to call a witness to clarify Mr. Pierce's living arrangements in Miami." Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Who's the witness, Ms. Sullivan?" "Amber Riley, Mr. Pierce's." Eleanor paused just long enough to let the word hang in the air. "Personal trainer." I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart. That had broken a long time ago. This was something deeper, something structural. The last piece of denial I'd been holding onto the part of me that still wondered if maybe I'd misunderstood, if maybe there was an explanation. There wasn't. Jordan's face went pale, not the gray ash color from earlier, pale like paper, like bone. "Your Honor." Gregory Walsh finally found his voice. This is completely out of left field. We weren't given notice because your client lied about his assets, his income, and his living arrangements," Eleanor said. "If he'd been honest, we wouldn't need to call witnesses. But he wasn't. So here we are." Judge Matthews rubbed his temple. He looked tired, old, like this case had aged him 10 years in 2 hours. "Ms. Riley is in the building," he asked. "She is, Your Honor. I can have her on the stand in 5 minutes." Judge Matthews glanced at the clock on the wall. 10-minute recess, then we'll hear from Ms. Riley. He banged the gavel. Jordan's mouth opened and closed again, like a fish drowning in air. He looked at Gregory Walsh, the way a drowning man reaches for a rope that isn't there. Gregory didn't meet his eyes. And I realized Jordan wasn't just losing the case. He was losing everything. The name hit me before Eleanor even finished saying it. Amber. I knew that name. I'd seen it on his phone once, just a notification that flashed across the screen while he was in the shower. When I asked him about it later, he'd laughed. Said she was his personal trainer, that she sent reminders about session times. I'd been so stupid. We were back in session. The 10-minute recess had felt like 10 seconds. I'd spent it in the hallway staring at the water fountain trying to breathe, trying not to throw up. Rachel had found me, put her hand on my shoulder and said nothing. Because what was there to say? Now I was back at the defense table, sitting next to Eleanor. Jordan was still on the witness stand, his collar damp with sweat. His tie was crooked. I'd never seen his tie crooked before. Eleanor stood at the podium, her hands folded in front of her, calm as still water. Mr. Pierce, who is Amber Riley. Jordan's jaw tightened. I don't know what your personal trainer, Eleanor said. The woman living in the Miami condominium. Jordan's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted to Gregory Walsh, who was furiously scribbling notes on a legal pad like he could write his way out of this. It's not relevant. Gregory Walsh shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. This is a no-fault divorce state. My client's personal life has no bearing on asset division. Eleanor didn't even glance at him. It's relevant when marital funds paid for it. Judge Matthews leaned forward. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Pierce. Jordan exhaled through his nose. Yes, I know Amber. How well do you know her? We're friends. Eleanor tilted her head. Friends. Is that why you bought her a $35,000 diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany's 3 days after purchasing the condo? She pulled a single sheet of paper from the stack on the table and held it up. Exhibit D, Your Honor. Receipt dated March 6th, 2022. Charged to Mr. Pierce's American Express card. The same card funded by Pinnacle Holdings, LLC. The courtroom went silent. $35,000. I couldn't process it. The number was too big, too absurd. I looked down at my left hand, at the thin white gold band I'd been wearing for 9 years. The small diamond, barely a quarter carat that Jordan had said was practical. He told me we needed to be realistic, that a big ring was a waste of money. And he'd spent $35,000 on a bracelet for another woman. A woman young enough to be... I couldn't finish the thought. Eleanor's voice cut through the fog. So, Mr. Pierce, is that what friends do? Buy each other diamond jewelry worth more than most people's annual salary? Jordan's face flushed red. I earned that money. I can spend it however I want. No. Eleanor said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. You can't hide it and spend it on a mistress while your wife clips coupons. Gregory Walsh stood again. Your Honor, this is inflammatory. It's factual, Eleanor said. And if Mr. Walsh would like to review the credit card statements, bank transfers, and wire receipts, I'm happy to provide them. Judge Matthews waved Gregory down. Sit down, Mr. Walsh. Miss Sullivan, continue. Eleanor turned back to Jordan. Let's talk about what else you bought Ms. Riley. Gym membership, $1,800 a year. Luxury spa packages, $4,000. Dinner at Le Bernardin, $650 for two. All charged to the same account. She paused. Let the numbers hang in the air. Meanwhile, Mrs. Mitchell was driving a 12-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield because you told her you couldn't afford to replace it. I remembered that car. I'd loved that car. It was the first thing I'd ever bought on my own back when I still had my own bank account. Back before Jordan convinced me we should simplify our finances. One account, he'd said, easier to manage, easier for him to control. Eleanor pulled another document from the stack. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit Exhibit E, a lease agreement for the Miami condominium, signed by Mr. Pierce and Mrs. Amber Riley, co-tenants. Jordan's hands gripped the armrests of the witness stand. That's a business arrangement. A business arrangement, Eleanor repeated slowly. For a luxury condo with nursery furniture and a co-tenant who's 28 years old and worked as a personal trainer at the gym you joined 2 years ago. She turned to face the courtroom, her voice rising just enough to fill the space. Your Honor, Mr. Pierce didn't just hide assets. He funded an entirely separate life, with marital funds, while his wife, she gestured toward me, was told there wasn't enough money to fix a windshield. I felt the weight of every eye in the room, the stenographer, the bailiff, the handful of people in the gallery who'd wandered in because they had nothing better to do. They were all looking at me, and for the first time in 9 years, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt angry. Jordan's voice cracked. I earned that money. I worked 80-hour weeks while she sat at home taking pictures. The words hit like a slap. Eleanor went still. So did the courtroom. Judge Matthews set down his pen, slowly, deliberately. Jordan kept going, his voice getting louder, sharper. She didn't contribute anything real. She had her little photography hobby, but that's all it was. A hobby. I was the one supporting us. I was the one bringing in actual income. Gregory Walsh looked like he was going to be sick. Eleanor let the silence stretch, let Jordan's words echo off the walls, settle into the court record, burn themselves into every mind in the room. Then she turned to Judge Matthews. Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect Mr. Pierce's view of his wife's contributions to the marriage. Judge Matthews nodded. So noted. Eleanor looked at Jordan, and I saw something in her face that I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disgust. Something colder, something final. Mr. Pierce, she said quietly, you just told this court that your wife contributed nothing real. Is that your testimony? Jordan's mouth opened. He realized too late what he'd done. I didn't mean, yes or no, Mr. Pierce. Did your wife contribute nothing real? Silence. Answer the question, Judge Matthews said. Jordan's voice came out hoarse. I misspoke. Did you? Silence again. I felt Eleanor's hand on mine under the table. Just a brief squeeze. A reminder that I wasn't alone, that someone was fighting for me. And then she turned back to Jordan and I saw something that terrified me. She was only getting started. Eleanor said the word cryptocurrency, and I watched the last shred of Jordan's composure evaporate like water on hot asphalt. His face went from pale to gray. His hands, already gripping the armrests, went white-knuckled. He looked like a man who just realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid. It was quicksand, and he'd been standing in it the whole time. Eleanor stood perfectly still at the podium, her voice calm and measured. Let's discuss your recent investments, Mr. Pierce, specifically March of 2022. $2 million was withdrawn from the Bermuda account. Where did it go? Jordan cleared his throat, tried to sit up straighter, failed. The market was down. I had losses in stocks. Eleanor smiled, not a warm smile, the kind of smile a chess player makes when they see checkmate 3 moves away. Interesting, because the bank records show a cryptocurrency wire transfer on the exact day you claim the market was down. She pulled another sheet of paper from the stack, held it up. Exhibit F, Your Honor, wire transfer confirmation. $2 million converted to digital currency through an offshore exchange. Jordan's mouth opened, closed. Gregory Walsh half stood, then sat back down like his legs had given out. He looked like a man watching a building collapse in slow motion and realizing he was still inside. Eleanor continued, her voice sharper now. You bought cryptocurrency, Mr. Pierce, specifically privacy coins, untraceable, stored on a cold storage hard drive, currently sitting in safe deposit box number 287 at National Trust Bank downtown. Jordan's eyes went wide. How did you? He stopped. Too late. The courtroom went silent. I felt my breath catch in my throat. He just confirmed it. Just admitted in front of a judge, a courtroom full of people, and a court stenographer typing every word that the money existed. Eleanor tilted her head like she was watching a student solve a simple math problem. How did I know I'm Eleanor Sullivan? Finding hidden money is what I do. She turned to Judge Matthews. Your Honor, Mr. Pierce failed to disclose this $3.5 million. Didn't share it with his wife. And certainly didn't list it on this morning's financial affidavit. $3.5 million. The number hit me like a fist to the chest. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. $3.5 million in a box. While I sold my camera equipment to buy groceries. While I pawned my grandmother's necklace, the one she'd given me before she died, the one I'd promised I'd never part with, just to pay the electric bill. While Rachel let me sleep on her couch because I had nowhere else to go. Jordan had $3.5 million sitting in a safe deposit box downtown. And he'd looked me in the eye every single day and told me we couldn't afford to fix the car. Eleanor's voice cut through the fog in my head. Mr. Pierce, the cryptocurrency market has fluctuated significantly since March of 2022. Current value of those holdings based on market data from this morning, $3.5 million. She let the number hang in the air. That's not including the $32 million in offshore accounts, or the luxury condo in Miami, or the $35,000 bracelet. This is separate, hidden in a completely different way. Judge Matthews leaned forward, his pen moving rapidly across the legal pad in front of him. He didn't look up when he spoke. Miss Sullivan, are you alleging that Mr. Pierce committed fraud by failing to disclose cryptocurrency holdings in a sworn financial statement filed with this court? Yes, Your Honor, that's exactly what I'm alleging. Jordan's voice came out strangled. I didn't think I had to list it. It's not liquid, it's stored offline. Eleanor's laugh was sharp and humorless. Not liquid, Your Honor. Cryptocurrency can be converted to cash in minutes, seconds if you use the right exchange. The only reason it's not liquid is because Mr. Pierce chose to hide it on a hard drive in a safe deposit box. She turned back to Jordan. Tell the court, does your wife know about the safe deposit box? Silence. Mr. Pierce, Judge Matthews said. Answer the question. Jordan's voice was barely a whisper. No. Does she have access to it? No. Has she ever had access to it? No. Eleanor folded her hands. So to be clear, you used marital funds to purchase cryptocurrency. You hid it in a safe deposit box your wife doesn't know exists. And you failed to disclose it in your financial affidavit this morning. Is that correct? Jordan didn't answer. Judge Matthews set down his pen, slowly, deliberately. The same way he'd done earlier when Jordan had said I didn't contribute anything real. Mr. Pierce, the judge said, his voice cold enough to freeze water. Do the cryptocurrency assets described by Mrs. Sullivan exist? Jordan swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. Yes. Did you list them on your financial disclosure? No, but no further questions needed. Judge Matthews turned to Eleanor. Ms. Sullivan, I'm going to need documentation for every claim you've made today. Bank records, wire transfers, lease agreements, receipts. Everything. By end of business tomorrow. Eleanor nodded. You'll have it by 5 p.m. today, Your Honor. Judge Matthews wrote something on his legal pad. I couldn't see what it was, but the way his jaw tightened told me it wasn't good for Jordan. Gregory Walsh stood up. His hands were shaking. I could see them trembling from across the courtroom. Your Honor, he said, his voice unsteady. I need to request a recess to consult with my client. The judge didn't even look up. Request denied. Your Honor, Sit down, Mr. Walsh. Gregory's face went pale. He looked at Jordan, then at Eleanor, then back at the judge. And I realized he knew. He knew Jordan had lied. Maybe not about the cryptocurrency specifically, but about something. And now he was stuck, complicit, trapped in a courtroom with a client who'd just committed perjury in front of a judge. He sat down. Jordan's shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, deflated, like all the air had been let out of him. I felt Eleanor's hand on mine again under the table, the same brief squeeze as before, a reminder. And I realized something. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about the affair or the lies or the 9 years of manipulation. This was about power. For 9 years, Jordan had held all of it. He'd controlled the bank accounts, the finances, the decisions. He'd made me feel small, worthless, dependent. And Eleanor was taking it back, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. She wasn't just winning the case. She was dismantling him. Okay, if you've stuck with me through all of this, I just want to say thank you. Drop a comment below and let me know you're still here. I'd love to hear from you. And I have to ask, if you were sitting where I was watching everything unfold in real time, what would be running through your mind? Would you feel like you've won? Or would you be bracing for the next blow? Tell me honestly, because what comes next is something I never saw coming. Oh, and a quick reminder, the story moving forward includes some creative touches for narrative purposes. So if that's not what you're after, this is a natural stopping point. Eleanor requested a brief recess. As she walked past Jordan's table, their eyes met for 3 seconds. It felt like 1,000 years. She told me later what she was thinking in that moment. That night, after everything ended, Eleanor and I sat in her hotel room. It was past midnight. The city lights of Riverside filtered through the thin curtains, painting shadows on the walls. She'd poured herself 2 fingers of scotch, the first drink I'd ever seen her take, and she finally told me the price she'd paid. "I went to the courthouse bathroom during that recess," she said, staring into her glass. "Not because I needed to, because I needed to cry somewhere no one could see." I tried to picture it Eleanor Sullivan, the iron gavel, breaking down in a courthouse bathroom. It didn't fit, but she kept talking, and I realized it fit perfectly. 2 weeks before the hearing, Eleanor said, "You called me from Rachel's apartment. You were desperate. I hadn't expected you to call. We'd barely spoken since the wedding. But when I heard your voice, I knew. Any mother would know." She told me she'd spent 3 days investigating. 72 hours of phone calls, subpoenas, offshore banking contacts. She'd cultivated over 30 years of practice. She found the accounts, the fraud, the systematic theft. "I sat in my office at 3 a.m. looking at the evidence," she said, "and I realized my son had become the kind of man I'd spent my entire career bringing to justice." Her voice cracked on the word son. I didn't say anything, just waited. 3 days before the trial, I drove to Riverside, went to his office, tried one last time. She told him, "Jordan, if you cooperate now, show remorse, you'll get 5 years maximum. If you fight this and lose, you'll get 10. He'd laughed. He said, "Mom, you taught me never to surrender." And I realized I'd failed him somewhere. Eleanor looked at me, then her eyes red-rimmed but dry. When I taught him never to surrender, I meant never surrender to injustice. But he learned never to surrender to consequences. That's where I failed. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was shaking. She told me about the family trust next. "In 2016, I was worried about your future. I could see the way he controlled the finances, the way you asked permission for everything. So I had a lawyer, Robert Mason, someone Jordan didn't know, set up a family trust to protect marital assets." My breath caught. I didn't know. "You weren't supposed to. Jordan thought it was a routine tax planning strategy. He never knew I was behind it. I was trying to protect you even then." The realization hit me like cold water. Eleanor had been fighting for me for 7 years, before I'd even known I needed fighting for. "I sat in that office," Eleanor continued, "and I watched my son dismiss every warning, every piece of evidence. He thought he was untouchable. And I knew that if I walked away, you'd lose everything. Your home, your safety, your future." She paused, took a sip of scotch. "And I'd lose my son either way. If I defended him, I'd watch him destroy you. If I fought him, I'd destroy him myself." "So you chose justice," I said quietly. "I chose you," she corrected. "Justice was just the tool I used." Eleanor told me what happened in that courthouse bathroom during the recess. She'd locked herself in a stall, pressed her forehead against the cold metal door, and cried for 2 minutes. Allowed herself 2 minutes to grieve the son she'd raised. The little boy who used to sit on her office floor building towers out of law books. The teenager who'd written her a Mother's Day card that said, "You're my hero." I looked in the mirror, she said, and I made a choice. I could be his mother and watch him destroy an innocent woman. Or I could be a lawyer and save you. She'd chosen the latter. When I walked back into that courtroom, Eleanor said, her voice steady now, "I wasn't his mother anymore. I was your lawyer, and I was going to win." I asked her if she regretted it. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that I raised a man who could do what he did to you, but I don't regret stopping him." She told me she'd tried to warn him one more time right before the hearing. She'd send him a text message at 6 a.m. "It's not too late to do the right thing." He'd responded, "See you in court, Mom." "That's when I knew," Eleanor said. "He wasn't going to change. He was going to fight. And I was going to have to destroy him to save you." I realized sitting there in that hotel room that Eleanor hadn't just taken my case. She'd sacrificed her son for me. She'd walked into that courtroom knowing she'd have to dissect his lies, expose his crimes, humiliate him in front of a judge and a gallery full of strangers. And she'd done it anyway. "I stopped being his mother," Eleanor said, setting down her glass. "The moment I saw what he did to you, and I became the lawyer I was always meant to be." She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. "Tomorrow, she said, "I'm going to finish what I started. And when it's over, you'll be free. And he'll be exactly where he deserves to be." I believed her, because Eleanor Sullivan didn't lose. Back in that courthouse bathroom during the recess, Eleanor had splashed cold water on her face, fixed her hair, straightened her blazer, and she'd walked back into courtroom 7, not as a mother, as the iron gavel. When we returned after the recess, Gregory Walsh looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing on a sinking ship, and I watched him try to jump. Eleanor took her place at the defense table, her face composed, her hands steady. Whatever grief she'd allowed herself during the recess was locked away now. She was the iron gavel again. But before she could stand, Gregory Walsh rose from his seat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tight, "I respectfully request permission to withdraw as counsel for Mr. Pierce." The courtroom went silent. Jordan's head snapped toward Gregory, his eyes wide. "What, you can't quit? I paid you $75,000. Gregory didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Judge Matthews. "An ethical conflict has arisen, Your Honor. Based on testimony my client has given, continuing to represent him would violate my professional obligations." The message was clear. Gregory wouldn't help a man commit perjury. Judge Matthews leaned back, his expression somewhere between irritation and disbelief. "Mr. Walsh, we're in the middle of a hearing. This is highly irregular." "I understand, Your Honor, but as an officer of the court..." Jordan exploded. "You coward." His voice was loud, raw, desperate. "I paid you. You work for me." He lunged toward Gregory, his hand shooting out to grab the lapels of Gregory's jacket. For a second, everything froze. Jordan's knuckles were white, his jaw clenched, his eyes wild. I'd seen that look before, in our kitchen, in our bedroom. It was the look of a man who'd lost control. And for the first time in 9 years, I wasn't the one in his line of fire. Officer Cooper moved faster than I thought possible. He was across the courtroom in 3 strides, his hand closing around Jordan's wrist. "Let go," Cooper said, his voice calm but firm. Now, Jordan didn't let go. "Mr. Pierce," Cooper said again, louder. "Let go." Jordan's fingers unclenched, slowly, reluctantly. Cooper didn't release him. He kept his hand on Jordan's arm and guided him firmly back to his seat. "Sit down and stay there. If you move again, you're going to holding. Understand?" Jordan sat. His chest was heaving, his tie crooked, his hair falling into his eyes. He looked like a cornered animal. Judge Matthews' voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Pierce, if you make one more outburst, I will hold you in contempt and have you removed from this courtroom. Do I make myself clear?" Jordan's voice came out strangled. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Matthews turned to Gregory. "Mr. Walsh, I do not approve your withdrawal at this time. You will ensure your client's rights are protected until this hearing concludes. After that, you may file whatever motions you like." Gregory nodded, defeated. He adjusted his jacket and sat back down, but not in the same chair. He moved 1 seat over, 2 feet of distance between him and Jordan. Even his lawyer doesn't want to sit near him. Eleanor was still standing at the defense table, watching with calm detachment. She didn't look surprised. She'd expected this. Maybe she'd even planned for it. Judge Matthews took a long breath. "Miss Sullivan, you may continue." Eleanor inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Honor." She let the silence stretch. Let the weight of what had just happened settle over the room. Then she spoke. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my next witness, someone who can speak to Mr. Pierce's character. I call Rachel Bennett." The name hit me like a punch to the chest. Rachel, my best friend. The woman who'd let me sleep on her couch when I had nowhere else to go, who'd driven me to the emergency room when I couldn't stop shaking, who'd sat with me at 3 a.m. and told me I wasn't crazy. Rachel had seen everything. I turned, looking toward the back of the courtroom. The doors opened and Rachel walked in. She was wearing a navy blue dress, simple and professional. Her hair was pulled back, her face calm. But I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was terrified, but she was here. Officer Cooper gestured toward the witness stand, and Rachel walked forward. Her heels clicked softly against the tile. Every eye in the courtroom followed her. When she passed Jordan's table, she didn't look at him. But Jordan looked at her, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, not anger, recognition, and something worse, guilt. Rachel took the stand. Officer Cooper held out the Bible and she placed her left hand on it, raised her right. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you, God?" "I do." Her voice was steady, strong. Eleanor stepped forward. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "how long have you known the plaintiff Chloe Mitchell?" Rachel looked at me, just for a second, and I saw everything in that look. The late-night phone calls, the bruises I'd tried to hide with makeup, the times I'd canceled plans because Jordan didn't want me to go out. 15 years, Rachel said, since college. Eleanor nodded. "And during that time, did you observe Mrs. Mitchell's relationship with her husband, Jordan Pierce?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "Yes. Can you describe what you observed?" Gregory Walsh stood halfway, his voice weak. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance." Eleanor didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, Mr. Pierce testified under oath that his wife contributed nothing to the marriage. I'm establishing a pattern of emotional and financial abuse that directly contradicts his claim." Judge Matthews waved Gregory down. "Overruled. Answer the question, Ms. Bennett." Rachel looked at Jordan, and this time she didn't look away. "I watched him destroy her," she said quietly. Rachel stepped up to the witness stand, and I felt our entire friendship flash before my eyes. Every tear she'd wiped away. Every night she'd let me sleep on her couch when I had nowhere else to go. Every time she'd told me I deserved better, and I'd insisted she was wrong. Every moment she'd seen what was happening and loved me anyway. Eleanor stood at the podium, her voice softer than it had been all morning. Not weak, just gentle. "The way you speak to someone who's already carrying enough weight. Ms. Bennett." Eleanor said, "How do you know the plaintiff?" Rachel's hands were folded in her lap, her knuckles white, but her voice was steady. "Chloe and I have been best friends since college, 20 years. And during that time, did you observe Mr. Pierce's treatment of your friend?" "Yes, for the past 9 years." Eleanor nodded. "Can you describe what you observed?" Rachel took a breath. I watched her chest rise and fall, saw her jaw tighten. "It started small," she said. "He'd criticize her photography, call it a hobby, like it wasn't real work. Then he took control of the money. She had to ask permission to buy groceries. He'd check every receipt. Hearing it out loud made it real. I'd normalized this insanity. I'd told myself it was practical, that Jordan was just careful with money, that he was protecting us. But it wasn't protection. It was control. Eleanor's voice pulled me back. "Ms. Bennett, were you present on the night before their wedding?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, I was Chloe's maid of honor. We were at the hotel. Can you describe what happened that night?" Rachel's voice wavered just slightly. "Jordan came to her room around midnight. He had a stack of papers, the prenup. He told her if she didn't sign it, he'd cancel the wedding. He'd tell everyone she was unstable. And he'd make sure her grandmother, who was sick at the time, lost her spot in the care facility." My throat tightened. I'd almost forgotten that part. The way Jordan had stood in the doorway of my hotel room, still in his tuxedo from the rehearsal dinner, holding those papers like a weapon. "Sign it, Grace," he'd said. He'd called me Grace back then, before he started calling me Chloe in that cold, distant way. "Unless you want to explain to 300 guests why there's no wedding tomorrow." Rachel's voice cracked. Chloe cried. I told her not to sign, but she was terrified. Her grandmother was 92 years old in a memory care unit. Jordan had connections. He could have... She stopped, swallowed. She believed him. Eleanor let the silence settle. Let the weight of it press down on the courtroom. "Ms. Bennett," she said quietly, "did you ever witness Mr. Pierce make threats toward Mrs. Mitchell after she filed for divorce?" Rachel looked at Jordan. For the first time since she'd taken the stand, she looked directly at him, and he looked away. "Last year." Rachel said, "After Chloe filed, Jordan asked to meet me at a coffee shop. He said he wanted to clear the air, but what he really wanted was to send me a message." Eleanor tilted her head. "What did he say?" Rachel's voice was clear now, strong. "He said, I'm going to destroy her. I'm going to make sure she ends up homeless and begging me to take her back. This is going to be fun." The courtroom went silent. Not the tense waiting kind of silence, the horrified kind. Rachel's eyes didn't leave Jordan's face. "Those were your exact words. This is going to be fun." Jordan's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists on the table, but he didn't say anything, couldn't say anything, because it was true. Judge Matthews was writing furiously on his legal pad. I watched the pen move across the paper, fast and sharp, like he was carving the words into stone. Eleanor folded her hands. "Ms. Bennett, in your 20 years of friendship with Mrs. Mitchell, did you ever see her as unstable?" As Mr. Pierce claimed. Rachel shook her head. "No, never. Chloe is one of the strongest people I know, but he made her feel small, worthless, like she was lucky he even tolerated her." I felt tears burn behind my eyes. I didn't let them fall. Eleanor's voice was soft. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett. No further questions." She turned to Gregory Walsh. "Your witness, Mr. Walsh." Gregory looked at his notes, stared at them for a long moment. Then he looked up at Judge Matthews. "No questions, Your Honor." The courtroom stirred. A murmur ran through the gallery like a ripple across water. "No questions." Gregory Walsh, the shark, the hired gun, the man who'd promised Jordan he'd bury me in court, he had no questions, because there was nothing to ask. No cross-examination that wouldn't make Jordan look worse. No question that wouldn't dig the hole deeper. He'd given up. Judge Matthews nodded slowly. "Ms. Bennett, you may step down." Rachel stood, smoothed her dress, and walked back toward the gallery. When she passed my table, she looked at me. Just for a second. And I mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." She nodded. Her eyes were shining. Eleanor waited until Rachel had taken her seat in the gallery. Then she turned to Judge Matthews. "Your Honor, I have one more witness I'd like to call before we break for lunch." Judge Matthews glanced at the clock. "Proceed, Miss Sullivan." Eleanor's voice was calm, steady. "I call Amber Riley." The name hit the courtroom like a lightning strike. Jordan's head snapped up. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. Gregory Walsh closed his eyes like a man accepting his fate, and I realized this wasn't over. Eleanor wasn't just dismantling Jordan's finances, his reputation, his defense. She was dismantling his lies, one witness at a time. I'd imagined Amber Riley 1,000 different ways during those sleepless nights. I'd pictured her smug, confident, beautiful in the way that makes other women feel small. I hadn't expected her to walk in looking terrified, or to completely avoid looking at Jordan. The courtroom doors opened and a young woman stepped through. She was wearing a simple navy dress, nothing flashy. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no jewelry except small silver earrings. She looked like someone's younger sister, someone's daughter. She walked past Jordan's table and he reached out his hand, extending toward her like he could stop her, pull her back, make her listen. "Amber, please don't." She recoiled like he was poison. Officer Cooper stepped forward just in case, but Amber kept walking. She climbed the steps to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Her hand was shaking. Eleanor stood at the podium, her voice gentle, the same tone she'd used with Rachel. "Ms. Riley, thank you for coming. I know this is difficult." Amber nodded, didn't speak, just nodded. "Can you tell the court your relationship to Mr. Pierce?" Amber's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I was his girlfriend. For the past 2 years. Her voice cracked on the word was. "I broke up with him this morning." Eleanor tilted her head. "Why?" Amber looked at me. For the first time since she'd walked in, she looked directly at me. And I saw it in her eyes, the same thing I'd seen in the mirror for 9 years. Shame. "Because Miss Sullivan showed me text messages," Amber said. "Jordan has another girlfriend in Chicago and one in Seattle. I was number 3. The courtroom erupted. Not just murmurs this time, actual noise, gasps. Someone in the gallery said, "Jesus Christ." Judge Matthews banged his gavel. "Order." But I couldn't hear it. Couldn't hear anything over the roar in my head. 3 girlfriends. Not just me and Amber. 3 other women. While he was married to me. Amber kept talking and I forced myself to listen. He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife was unstable and trying to ruin him. I believed him. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. He made me feel special until I realized I was just convenient. Eleanor let her cry for a moment. Then gently, "Did Mr. Pierce discuss his wife with you?" Amber nodded. wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. All the time. He called her a burden, an obstacle. He said... She paused, swallowed hard. He said he was going to destroy her in court and leave her with nothing for fun. He called it taking out the trash. The words hit me like a slap. Taking out the trash. That's what I was to him. Garbage. Something to be discarded. Amber looked at me again, her eyes red-rimmed. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were real. He made you sound like a villain. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process it. This woman, this girl, really, she was only 28, had been lied to, just like I had. She wasn't the enemy. She was another victim. Eleanor's voice cut through my thoughts. Ms. Riley, did Mr. Pierce ever show you written communication about his plans for his wife? Amber nodded. Yes. He showed me text messages he'd sent to his lawyer, planning how to make her homeless so she'd have to crawl back begging. He laughed about it. He thought it was funny. Judge Matthews's pen stopped moving. He looked up at Amber, then at Jordan, and I saw something shift in his face. Not just disapproval, disgust. Eleanor pulled a document from her briefcase. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit G text message records between Mr. Pierce and his attorney from 6 months ago, prior to Mrs. Mitchell filing for divorce. She handed copies to the judge and to Gregory Walsh, who looked at them like they were written in a foreign language. Judge Matthews read in silence. His jaw tightened. His knuckles went white around the pen. Ms. Sullivan, he said slowly, are these messages authenticated? Yes, Your Honor, forensically verified, time-stamped, cross-referenced with phone records. Judge Matthews set the pages down, looked at Jordan, and I saw something I'd never seen in a courtroom before. A judge looking at someone with pure, undiluted contempt. Mr. Pierce. Judge Matthews said, his voice cold enough to freeze water. Did you send these messages? Jordan's mouth opened, closed. His lawyer, Gregory Walsh, sitting 2 feet away from him like a man trying to avoid contagion, didn't say a word. Mr. Pierce, the judge said again, answer the question. Jordan's voice came out hoarse. I was angry. I didn't mean... Did you send them? Silence. Yes. Judge Matthews leaned back in his chair. Noted. Eleanor turned back to Amber. Ms. Riley, when did you discover there were other women? This morning. Ms. Sullivan contacted me yesterday. She showed me bank records, wire transfers to Chicago and Seattle, apartment leases, jewelry purchases. Amber's voice hardened. He was living 3 separate lives, and I was stupid enough to think I was the only one. You weren't stupid, Eleanor said gently. You were lied to, just like Mrs. Mitchell. Amber nodded, looked at me again. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. If I'd known he was married, if I'd known any of this, I never would have... Her voice broke. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart. That had been broken for years. Something else. The part of me that had wanted to hate her. The part of me that had spent sleepless nights imagining her as the villain in my story. She wasn't a villain. She was 28 years old. She'd been lied to, manipulated, used, just like I had. Just like the women in Chicago and Seattle probably had been. Jordan didn't love any of us. He loved control. Eleanor's voice was soft. Thank you, Ms. Riley. I know this wasn't easy. Amber nodded, wiped her eyes again. Eleanor turned to Gregory Walsh. Your witness, Mr. Walsh. Gregory didn't even look up from his notes. No questions, Your Honor. Judge Matthews gestured to Amber. You may step down, Ms. Riley. Amber stood unsteady on her feet. As she walked past the defense table, Jordan tried again. Amber, I can explain. She didn't stop, didn't look at him, just kept walking. And I realized she was stronger than I'd been. It had taken me 9 years to leave. It had taken her one morning. Eleanor let the silence settle. Let Amber's testimony sink into the walls of the courtroom, into the court record, into the mind of every person in that room. Then she turned to Judge Matthews. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm and steady. I have one final witness regarding Mr. Pierce's business conduct. After that, I believe the evidence will be complete. Judge Matthews glanced at the clock. We'll hear one more witness, then break for lunch. Call your witness, Ms. Sullivan. Eleanor nodded, and I wondered what could possibly be left to say. Jordan had been exposed as a liar, a cheat, a manipulator, a thief. He'd hidden millions. He'd threatened me. He'd lived 3 separate lives while pretending to be a faithful husband. What else was there? But Eleanor's expression told me there was more. There was always more. I didn't know who Daniel Ross was until he walked through the courtroom doors. But the way Jordan's face drained of color told me this was another ghost coming back to haunt him. Eleanor's voice was steady, efficient. I called Daniel Ross. A man in a business suit walked in. Mid-40s salt and pepper hair, the kind of weathered face that comes from years of honest work. He looked like someone's father, someone's uncle. He looked like a man who'd been betrayed. Jordan whispered something under his breath. I couldn't hear it, but I saw his lips form the word no. Daniel Ross walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. His hand didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. This wasn't his first time speaking truth about Jordan Pierce. Eleanor stood at the podium. Mr. Ross, please describe your business relationship with the defendant. Daniel's voice was calm, measured. In 2022, Jordan approached me about a partnership, a real estate development project. He said it required an investment of $3.5 million. My stomach dropped. $3.5 million, the same amount as the cryptocurrency. Eleanor didn't react. She'd known, of course she'd known. And did you invest? Yes, in March of 2022. Jordan showed me financial statements. Pinnacle Holdings, strong portfolio, legitimate company. I did my due diligence. Everything looked solid. What happened to your investment, Mr. Ross? Daniel's jaw tightened. It disappeared into offshore accounts. I received fake loss reports for months. When I demanded an audit, Jordan threatened to sue me for breach of contract. Eleanor pulled a stack of documents from her briefcase. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit H, the partnership agreement between Mr. Ross and Mr. Pierce, and Exhibit 1 wire transfer records showing Mr. Ross's $3.5 million investment. She handed copies to the judge and to Gregory Walsh, who didn't even look at them. He just set them on the table like they were contaminated. Eleanor turned back to Daniel. Mr. Ross, where did the money go? Offshore. The same Bermuda accounts Ms. Sullivan discovered earlier. Jordan used my investment to fund his personal accounts, his cryptocurrency purchase. His Daniel's voice hardened. His luxury condo in Miami. I felt sick. The money wasn't even Jordan's. It was stolen from this man, this honest businessman who'd trusted him. Eleanor's voice was gentle. Mr. Ross, did you ever receive any return on your investment? Not a dime. And when I filed a complaint last month, I discovered Pinnacle Holdings is a shell company. No real business operations, just Jordan moving money around. Judge Matthews leaned forward. Mr. Ross, are you saying Mr. Pierce defrauded you out of $3.5 million? Daniel looked at Jordan, not with anger, with something worse. Disappointment. Yes, Your Honor, that's exactly what I'm saying. Eleanor let the silence settle. Then, Mr. Ross, what impact did this fraud have on your life? Daniel's voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. I lost my life savings, everything I'd built over 25 years. I nearly lost my house, my wife and I. He stopped, swallowed. We're still recovering. I thought about the Miami condo, the $35,000 bracelet, the nursery furniture. Jordan had bought all of it with Daniel Ross's money. Money stolen from a man who'd trusted him. I'd thought I was Jordan's only victim. I was wrong. There were so many of us. Amber, the women in Chicago and Seattle, Daniel, and God knows how many others I didn't know about. Jordan didn't just hurt the people closest to him. He hurt everyone. Eleanor's voice cut through my thoughts. Mr. Ross, did you ever meet Mrs. Mitchell? Daniel shook his head. No, Jordan never mentioned he was married. He told me he was single, a bachelor investor looking to expand his portfolio. Another lie. Another version of Jordan Pierce tailored for another victim. Thank you, Mr. Ross, Eleanor said. No further questions. She turned to Gregory Walsh. Didn't even ask, just waited. Gregory didn't stand, didn't speak, just shook his head. No questions. Judge Matthews gestured to Daniel. You may step down, Mr. Ross. Daniel stood. As he walked past Jordan's table, he didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him. Just walked past like Jordan was already gone, like he was a ghost. Eleanor remained standing. Your Honor, the defense rests. I believe the evidence speaks for itself. Judge Matthews nodded slowly. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his robe pocket. The gesture was deliberate, methodical. When he looked at Jordan, I saw something cold and decisive in his eyes. Justice was coming. Ms. Sullivan. Judge Matthews said, "This court has heard extensive testimony regarding Mr. Pierce's financial misconduct, fraudulent concealment of assets, perjury, and—" He paused, glanced at his notes. "A pattern of behavior that can only be described as systematic exploitation." Jordan's shoulders slumped. He looked smaller, defeated. Judge Matthews continued, "We'll take a 1-hour recess for lunch. When we return, I'll issue my ruling on the emergency motions filed by Ms. Sullivan. Both parties will remain available." He banged the gavel. The courtroom erupted into noise, people standing, talking, gathering their things. But I couldn't move, couldn't process. Eleanor's hand touched my shoulder. "Come on, let's get some air." I stood on shaking legs, looked back at Jordan one last time. He was sitting alone at the defense table. Gregory Walsh had already left his briefcase in hand, walking out the door like he couldn't escape fast enough. Jordan was completely alone, and for the first time in 9 years, I didn't feel sorry for him. Judge Matthews removed his glasses and set them on the bench. The courtroom went silent, and I stopped breathing. He looked at Jordan, not with anger, not with disgust, with something deeper, something final. "Mr. Pierce." He said, his voice steady and cold. "In 23 years on this bench, I have witnessed many reprehensible acts, but I have rarely seen arrogance and cruelty to match yours." Jordan didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there staring at the table in front of him. Judge Matthews continued, "You weaponized this court system. You mocked the judicial process. You attempted to use this courtroom as a tool of control to inflict further harm on a woman you vowed to cherish." Each word landed like a hammer blow. "You walked into my courtroom thinking your money and your lawyer meant you'd already won, that you could manipulate the system the way you manipulated your wife, your mistresses, your business partner. You thought you were untouchable." The judge's voice grew colder. "You were wrong." I felt Eleanor's hand on mine under the table. A brief squeeze. I squeezed back hard enough to hurt. Judge Matthews turned to me, and his expression softened. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "I owe you an apology. This court should have protected you sooner." My vision blurred. He was apologizing to me. Has anyone with power ever apologized to me? I couldn't remember, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but sit there and try not to fall apart. "I am issuing a preliminary ruling today," Judge Matthews said. "The final order will come after a complete forensic audit. But given the evidence presented, I am making the following immediate determinations." He picked up a piece of paper, read slowly, deliberately. "First, I am freezing all assets belonging to Jordan Pierce Pinnacle Holdings and any entity he controls. Access will be granted only to Mrs. Mitchell and her attorney." I heard Jordan inhale sharply, heard him whisper something to Gregory Walsh. Gregory didn't respond. Judge Matthews continued, "Second, I am granting Mrs. Mitchell immediate and exclusive use of the marital residence at Lakeside Towers and the Bayview Estate. Mr. Pierce, you have 2 hours to vacate. You may take personal belongings only. If you remove anything else, artwork, electronics, documents, you will be placed under arrest. 2 hours. Jordan had 2 hours to leave the home we'd shared for 9 years. The home I'd cleaned, decorated, lived in while he was out living 3 other lives. Third, Judge Matthews said, and his voice hardened, I am referring the transcript of these proceedings to the District Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges, perjury, wire fraud, embezzlement. Mr. Walsh, I expect your full cooperation in any investigation that follows." Gregory Walsh nodded, pale and silent. Jordan didn't move, didn't react. He just sat there staring at nothing. Judge Matthews wasn't finished. Fourth, Mr. Pierce will pay 100% of Mrs. Mitchell's attorney fees. Eleanor's fees flashed through my mind. More than $1,000 an hour, 72 hours of investigation, court time, preparation. Jordan was going to pay for his own destruction. Additionally, Judge Matthews said, I am placing a restraining order on Mr. Pierce. No contact with Mrs. Mitchell. No communication through third parties. No attempts to access joint accounts or marital property. Violation will result in immediate arrest." He set down the paper, looked at Jordan one last time. "Mr. Pierce, you came into this courtroom expecting to win. You expected your wife to leave with nothing. You expected to laugh about it with your mistresses, to brag to your friends about how you took out the trash." The judge's voice was ice. "But you underestimated two things. You underestimated your wife's courage, and you underestimated your mother's sense of justice." He picked up the gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." The sound of the gavel hitting the bench echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. "It's over. I won. I actually won." The tears came before I could stop them. Not quiet tears, not dignified tears. Ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. Eleanor's arms wrapped around me. She didn't say anything, just held me while I cried into her shoulder. I felt Rachel's hand on my back, heard her whisper, "You did it. You're free." Free. The word didn't feel real. I'd spent 9 years in a cage I didn't even know existed, and in 3 hours, Eleanor had torn it apart. The courtroom was emptying. People filing out, murmuring to each other, glancing back at me with expressions I couldn't read. Pity, respect, relief. I didn't care. I looked up, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Jordan was still sitting at the defense table, alone. Gregory Walsh had already left. I'd seen him slip out the back door the second the gavel fell. Jordan's world had collapsed in 3 hours. The penthouse, the cars, the millions hidden offshore, the reputation, the control, gone. All of it gone. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 9 years, I didn't look away. I looked right back at him, and I smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a triumphant one. A smile that said, "I'm done. I'm done being afraid. Done being small. Done letting you take up space in my head. I'm done." Jordan's face crumpled. For a second, I thought he might cry, but he didn't. He just looked away, slumping in his chair like a man who'd run out of fight. Eleanor touched my arm. "Come on, let's get you out of here." I stood on shaking legs. Rachel was waiting in the aisle, her face wet with tears, her arms open. I walked into her hug and held on tight. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." Rachel squeezed me harder. "You don't have to thank me. You did this. You survived him, and now you're going to thrive." I pulled back, looked at Eleanor. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or relief. "What happens now?" I asked. Eleanor's smile was small but fierce. "Now we make sure he never hurts anyone again." Officer Cooper stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Mrs. Mitchell, if you'd like an escort out of the building, I'm happy to provide one." I nodded. "Thank you." As we walked toward the doors, I glanced back one last time. Jordan was still sitting there, motionless, staring at the table. And I realized something. He'd spent 9 years trying to make me feel like nothing. But in the end, he was the one left with nothing. The courthouse steps felt different walking down than they had walking up this morning. Same concrete, same worn edges, same metal railing cold under my hand. But the ground beneath my feet finally felt solid. Eleanor walked beside me, her briefcase in one hand, her phone in the other. She was already fielding calls, her office probably, or other clients waiting for her attention. But she stayed close like she was afraid I'd disappear if she looked away. Rachel was a few steps ahead, talking to someone on her phone, her voice bright with relief. And behind us, through the glass doors, I could see Jordan still sitting in the courtroom, alone, motionless. We reached the hallway and Eleanor stopped to pack her briefcase properly. Documents, exhibits, legal pads, everything organized with the same precision she'd used to dismantle Jordan's lies. I finally found my voice. "Why?" Eleanor looked up. "Why what? Why did you do this?" My throat was tight. "You didn't have to. You could have walked away, let him destroy me. It would have been easier." Eleanor set down the briefcase, looked at me the way a mother looks at a child asking why the sky is blue. Like the answer should be obvious, but she'll explain it anyway. "Because you called me," she said. "Because you were brave enough to ask for help." She paused, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. "And because he needed to be stopped. even though he's my son, especially because he's my son. The words hit me harder than I expected, especially because he's my son. Eleanor wasn't just protecting me. She was taking responsibility for the man she'd raised, the man who'd become a monster under her roof in her care. I should have seen it sooner, she said quietly. The way he talked about money, about control, the way he treated people like tools. I thought it was ambition. Her voice cracked. I thought I'd raised him better. I reached out and took her hand. She looked surprised, then she squeezed back hard. You saved me, I said. That's what matters. Eleanor nodded, didn't say anything, just held my hand for a moment longer, then let go and went back to packing her briefcase. Footsteps echoed behind us. Chloe, please. I froze. Jordan's voice, desperate, raw. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I turned around slowly. He was standing 10 feet away, his tie loose, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who'd been awake for 3 days straight. He looked like he was falling apart, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, no anger, just nothing. Eleanor stepped between us, not aggressive, not dramatic, just a simple, decisive movement that put her body between mine and Jordan's. A human barrier. Mr. Pierce, she said, her voice ice cold, my client does not speak to criminals. If you have something to say, you can say it to my associate. She gestured to Lauren Adams, who stepped forward and handed Jordan a business card. Her expression was neutral professional, like she was handing out pamphlets at a conference. Now step aside, Eleanor said. Jordan looked at me, tried to look past Eleanor around her like he could will me into acknowledging him. But I didn't. I just turned and walked away. Eleanor fell into step beside me, and we walked past Jordan like he was invisible, because he was. We pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the sunlight. The March air was cold, but the sun was warm on my face, bright enough to make me squint. I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps and breathed. Really breathed, deep and full and clean. I haven't been able to breathe normally in 9 years, I said. Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled. Not the sharp professional smile she wore in court. A real smile. Soft and sad and relieved all at once. Breathe now, she said. You're free. Free. The word settled over me like sunlight. I was free. Free from Jordan. Free from his control, his manipulation, his lies. Free from the constant fear, the walking on eggshells, the second-guessing every word and action. Free. Rachel ran up the steps, her phone still in her hand, her face glowing. I told you, she said, throwing her arms around me. I told you you were stronger than him. I hugged her back hard enough to hurt. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have, Rachel said, but I'm glad you didn't have to. The three of us stood there on the courthouse steps, 3 women in the sunlight. Eleanor Sullivan, the iron gavel, Rachel Bennett, the loyal friend, and me, Chloe Mitchell, the survivor. Behind us, the glass doors opened. Gregory Walsh stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, walking fast. He didn't look at us, didn't slow down, just kept walking like he couldn't get away fast enough. I wondered who he was calling. His own lawyer, probably, trying to figure out how to save himself from the wreckage of Jordan Pierce. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then looked at me. The district attorney, she said. They want to file criminal charges today. Wire fraud, embezzlement, perjury. She paused. They're asking if you're willing to testify at a criminal trial. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Eleanor's smile widened. Good, because we're not done yet. She turned and started down the steps, already typing a response on her phone. Rachel linked her arm through mine. Ready to go celebrate. I looked back at the courthouse one last time. Through the glass doors, I could see Jordan standing in the hallway, alone, lost, and I turned away. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. That night, after Eleanor dropped me off at Rachel's apartment, I sat on the couch and finally allowed myself to remember the night I should have run. The night before my wedding. Rachel made tea. Chamomile, the kind she always kept for me. She handed me the mug and sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. I held the tea but didn't drink it, just stared into the steam rising from the cup. Do you remember that night? I asked. Rachel nodded. I wish I'd dragged you out of there by force. I wouldn't have gone, I admitted. I loved him. Rachel's hand found mine. I know. I closed my eyes and let myself go back. 9 years ago, the Grand Riverside Hotel, room 412. I was 29 years old. My wedding dress was hanging on the closet door, wrapped in protective plastic, the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. I'd tried it on 3 times that day just to make sure it still fit, just to remind myself it was real. Tomorrow, I was going to marry Jordan Pierce. I was so happy I couldn't sleep. Rachel had gone back to her room around 11, said I needed rest, said tomorrow was going to be a long day, but I couldn't rest. I kept thinking about the ceremony, the vows, the way Jordan would look at me when I walked down the aisle. I loved him so much it hurt. At midnight, someone knocked on the door. I thought it was Rachel coming back to gossip or calm my nerves, but when I opened it, Jordan was standing there. He was holding a stack of papers. "Sign this," he said. No hello, no smile, just sign this. I blinked. What is it? A prenuptial agreement. My lawyer says it's smart. I took the papers, scanned the first page. Legal jargon dense and incomprehensible. But one phrase stood out clear as day. In the event of divorce, the wife shall receive no assets, no alimony, and no financial support of any kind. My stomach dropped. Jordan, this feels wrong. We're getting married tomorrow. We love each other. His face changed. Not slowly, not gradually. It was instant, like someone flipping a switch. The warmth in his eyes vanished. His jaw tightened. His voice went cold. If you don't sign it, there won't be a wedding. I stared at him. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? He didn't. Jordan the First. I'll call everyone right now, he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. I'll tell them you're mentally unstable, that you tried to trap me, that I can't marry someone I don't trust. My hands started shaking. You wouldn't do that. Try me. Jordan, please, and your grandmother's care facility. He leaned against the doorframe casual, like we were chatting over coffee. I'm still paying for that, aren't I? That stops too. The room tilted. My grandmother. 92 years old in a memory care unit because she couldn't remember her own name anymore. The facility cost $8,000 a month. I couldn't afford it. My parents couldn't afford it. Jordan had offered to pay, called it a gift, a gesture of love. Now he was holding it over my head like a weapon. You can't... My voice broke. She needs that care. She'll die without it. Jordan shrugged, then signed the paper. I felt tears sliding down my face, hot and angry and helpless. Chloe, he said, his voice softening just slightly, just enough to sound almost kind. This is just a formality. We're never going to divorce. We love each other. This is just protection for both of us. I looked at the papers in my hand, at the wedding dress hanging behind me, at Jordan standing in the doorway waiting. There was a knock on the door. Jordan stepped aside and Rachel walked in. She took one look at my face and froze. What's going on? Nothing, Jordan said. Just paperwork. Rachel's eyes went to the papers in my hand, then to Jordan. Chloe, don't sign that. Rachel. Jordan said, his voice hardening again. This is between me and my fiancé. Get out. Chloe, Rachel said, ignoring him. Please don't do this. I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she was standing between me and Jordan like she could protect me. But she couldn't. No one could. It's okay, Rachel, I heard myself say. I'll sign. It doesn't matter. We'll never divorce. We're in love. Rachel's face crumpled, but she nodded, stepped back, left the room without another word. Jordan handed me a pen. I signed. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely write my name, but I signed. And the second the pen left the paper, Jordan smiled. The real smile. The warm one. The one that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Good girl, he said. He kissed my forehead. Now let's get married. Everything will be perfect. He took the papers and left. And I stood there in my hotel room in my pajamas with my wedding dress hanging on the door. And I told myself it didn't matter. We were in love. I opened my eyes. The tea in my hands was cold. Rachel was watching me, her face wet with tears. I really believed it, I said. That love meant giving up my rights, that signing that paper was romantic somehow. Rachel shook her head. He was good at manipulation. I'll give him that. He made you think you didn't have a choice. No, I said quietly. He made me think I had a choice. Sign the paper or lose everything. That's not a choice. That's a threat. I set down the tea, looked at Rachel. You know what the worst part is? I spent 9 years thinking I signed because I loved him. Today I realized I signed because I was scared of him. From day one, I was already scared. There was another memory I'd buried for 6 years. A memory I hadn't told Eleanor, even though I probably should have. The night I lost our baby, and the night I knew exactly what kind of person Jordan really was. Rachel had gone to bed an hour ago. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. I sat on the couch alone and pulled out my phone, scrolled to the hidden folder, the one I'd created years ago, the one I never opened, and I looked at the ultrasound photo. 12 weeks, a tiny shape on a grainy black and white screen. I'd never known if it was a boy or a girl. I'd never had the chance to find out. 2017, Riverside General Hospital, 2 a.m. I woke up in a hospital bed groggy and disoriented. There were tubes in my arm, a blood pressure cuff squeezing my bicep, a machine beeping steadily beside me. A doctor I didn't recognize stood at the foot of the bed. Her face was kind, tired, the kind of tired that comes from delivering bad news over and over again. "Mrs. Pierce," she said gently, "I'm very sorry there were complications. We had to perform an emergency procedure. We couldn't save the pregnancy." The words didn't make sense at first. Couldn't save the pregnancy. And then they did, and my world ended. "Where's my husband?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, distant. The nurse standing beside the doctor looked uncomfortable. "He's in the waiting room. He said he had some work emails to handle." Work emails. I was losing our baby, and Jordan was handling work emails. The door opened. Jordan walked in. Not rushed, not frantic, just walking. He didn't come to the bed, didn't take my hand, just stood by the door, hands in his pockets. "So," he said. "Now what?" I stared at him. "Jordan, we lost the baby." "I heard." He glanced at the doctor. "Did they say when she can try again?" The doctor's expression shifted, just slightly, enough for me to see the disapproval. "Mr. Pierce," she said carefully, "your wife just underwent an emergency procedure. She needs time to heal, physically and emotionally." Jordan nodded like she'd told him the cafeteria was closed. "Right, yeah, of course." He looked at me. "Let me know when you're ready to go home." "Jordan, I need to get to the office. I'll come back later." And he left, just walked out. The nurse touched my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I didn't know if she was sorry about the baby or sorry about my husband. Maybe both. 3 days later, I was home, in bed, staring at the ceiling. I hadn't stopped crying. Every time I thought I was done, the tears would start again. Waves of grief that pulled me under and wouldn't let go. Jordan walked into the bedroom, not to check on me, to get his watch from the dresser. "You need to get over this," he said. I turned my head to look at him. "What?" "This." He gestured vaguely at me. "At the bed. At the tissue box on the nightstand. You need to move on. These things happen. We can try again later. Maybe when I make partner." I sat up slowly. "You don't even care, do you?" "Of course I care." His voice was flat, annoyed. "But being sad won't change anything. I need you healthy. We have a client dinner next week." Client dinner. I just lost our baby and he was worried about a client dinner. "You're relieved," I said. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. "You didn't even want this baby." Jordan shrugged. Actually shrugged. "I wasn't ready. Now we don't have to worry about it." He picked up his watch, strapped it onto his wrist. "I'll be late tonight, don't wait up." And he left. I sat there in bed in the house we shared and I understood. He didn't love me. He'd never loved me. I was just convenient. I looked down at the ultrasound photo on my phone. That was the moment. Not when he froze my bank accounts. Not when he hired Gregory Walsh. Not when he served me divorce papers with a smirk on his face. That moment, when he shrugged about our lost child. That's when I knew I had to leave. It just took me 6 more years to find the courage. I thought about the nursery furniture, the crib in Miami, the changing table, the rocking chair. When Eleanor had told me about it in the courtroom, I'd felt like I was drowning. Because I finally understood. Jordan could imagine a family. He could picture a nursery, a baby, a life with someone. Just not with me. Never with me. I touched the ultrasound photo one last time. Then I pressed delete. The phone asked if I was sure. I was. For 9 years, I'd kept that photo, hidden away in a folder I never opened, hoping that one day somehow Jordan would grieve with me, that he'd acknowledge what we'd lost, that he'd say he was sorry. But he never would, and I didn't need his grief anymore. I had my own, and that was enough. The photo disappeared. The folder was empty. I set down my phone and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd wake up in Rachel's apartment. I'd start looking for my own place. I'd figure out what came next. But tonight I let myself grieve. Not for Jordan, not for the marriage, not even for the baby I'd lost 6 years ago. I grieved for the woman I used to be, the one who'd believed love meant sacrifice, the one who'd thought that if she just tried hard enough she could make him care. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who didn't need anyone's permission to be free. 2 days after the trial, Eleanor called me from the Riverside Grand. She asked if I would come to her suite, room 804. Her voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before, not in the courtroom. Not even in that moment in the bathroom when she'd allowed herself 3 seconds of private grief before returning to demolish her own son. When I arrived, she opened the door in jeans. Eleanor Sullivan, the iron gavel in denim, and a soft cashmere sweater the color of slate. No armor, no briefcase. Just a woman holding 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch. "Come in," she said quietly. "We need to talk." The suite was elegant and impersonal. Beige walls, abstract art, a window overlooking the lights of Riverside. She poured 2 fingers of scotch into each glass neat and handed one to me. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. "I owe you everything," she said, sitting across from me on the ivory sofa. "Not just an apology. Everything." I didn't know what to say, so I waited. Eleanor took a slow sip, then set the glass down with care, as if it might shatter. I raised him, Chloe. Every cruel thing he did to you, every manipulative tactic, every cold calculation, I taught him that. I showed him how. Eleanor. No. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Let me say this. I've been rehearsing it for 2 days, and if I don't get it out now, I never will. She took a breath and I saw the crack widen. Jordan's father left when he was 5 years old. She began her gaze fixed on the amber liquid in her glass. He was a corporate lawyer just like me. Brilliant, ambitious, ruthless. We were a perfect match until we weren't. He wanted a partner who would put family first. I wanted a partner who understood that my career wasn't negotiable. She paused, her jaw tightening. So he left, and I told myself it didn't matter. I told Jordan it didn't matter. I said, we don't need him. We're strong. We'll be fine. And we were fine on paper. I worked 16-hour days. I hired the best nannies, enrolled him in the best schools. I gave him everything money could buy. But you weren't there, I said softly. Eleanor's eyes glistened. No, I wasn't. I missed his first day of kindergarten because I was in Geneva on a case. I missed his business school graduation because a client needed me in Singapore. I missed everything that mattered, and I convinced myself it was okay because I was teaching him to be strong, to be independent, to survive without needing anyone. Her voice broke on the last word. I taught him that success means winning at any cost, that emotions are a weakness, that money equals worth. She looked at me, and the guilt in her expression was so raw it hurt to witness. I turned him into a man who could look at his pregnant wife and see an inconvenience, a man who could lose a child and shrug it off as a minor setback, a man who could weaponize the legal system to destroy the woman he promised to love. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You gave him tools, I said carefully. He chose to weaponize them. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Eleanor's voice cracked. I thought when he married you, I thought maybe you'd soften him, that your warmth, your kindness, your art would balance out everything I'd made him into. But instead, he tried to break you. He tried to reshape you in his image because that's what I taught him to do, bend the world to your will, or destroy it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so unguarded it made my chest ache. I remember Christmas 2019. You and Jordan came to my house in Georgetown for dinner. I watched the way he spoke to you like you were an employee giving a disappointing performance review, and I pulled him aside and said, "Jordan, you treat Chloe like an employee, not a wife." Do you know what he said? I shook my head. He said, "That's rich coming from the woman who treated Dad like a subordinate." Eleanor's laugh was bitter and broken, and he was right. I destroyed my marriage with his father the exact same way he was destroying his marriage with you. I taught him that love is transactional. That partnership is about power, not compassion. The silence stretched between us heavy and aching. When you called me, Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper, and asked me to represent you, I knew what it meant. I knew I'd have to choose between being his mother and being a good person. And God, Chloe, it hurts. It hurts so much I can't breathe sometimes. I squeezed her hand tighter. But you chose, I said. You chose to stop the cycle. That's not cruelty, Eleanor. That's love. Is it? She searched my face, desperate for absolution. Or is it just too late? It's not too late to be the person you want to be, I told her. It's not too late to fix your life, to fix how you measure success, to fix how you show love. And if you'll let me help you, we can start with us. Eleanor's tears spilled over, then quiet and unchecked. She gripped my hand like a lifeline. I spent 30 years building a reputation, she said hoarsely. The iron gavel, the woman who never loses, the lawyer every powerful man fears. And it cost me my marriage. It cost me my son. It nearly cost you your life. But it didn't, I said firmly. I'm here. You're here. And we get to decide what happens next. She looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Hope fragile and tentative, breaking through the grief. I want to fix this, she said. I want to fix my life. Fix how I measure success. Fix how I love people. Starting with you, if you'll let me. I smiled through my own tears. I think we could both use a family that actually shows up. Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, soft and startled and genuine. She raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. I clinked my glass against hers. To new beginnings. We sat in that hotel room for another hour talking about everything and nothing, about Jordan's sentencing hearing, about my photography, about the apartment I was renting, about the small ways we were both learning to rebuild. When I finally left, Eleanor walked me to the door and pulled me into a hug, brief, fierce, and full of everything neither of us knew how to say. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me a second chance. Thank you, I whispered back, for fighting for me. As I walked back to my car under the glow of the riverside streetlights, I realized something. Eleanor and I had both spent years trapped in versions of ourselves we thought we had to be. But maybe, just maybe, we were finally learning how to be free. The gallery in downtown Riverside was small, but the floor-to-ceiling windows let in July sunlight like liquid gold. My photographs lined the walls, 20 of them, each one taken after the trial, after I was free. And for the first time in 9 years, I could breathe without being afraid. I'd called the exhibition Rebirth. It felt right. The photos were landscapes mostly. Riverside at dawn, the courthouse steps in winter light, the river in spring. But there were portraits too. Rachel laughing over coffee. Eleanor sitting in her office backlit by the setting sun. And one self-portrait, me in Rachel's apartment the morning after the trial, hair messy, eyes red, but smiling. The centerpiece was a photo I'd titled Courtroom 7, an empty wooden chair under harsh fluorescent light. The chair I'd sat in alone before everything changed. I stood in front of it now, watching people move through the gallery. Collectors, art students, friends. Someone had already put a red "sold" sticker on one of the landscape photos. I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not just pride, not just relief, recognition. For 9 years, I'd been told my photography was a hobby, a waste of time, something to do while Jordan was at work. Now people were paying money for it. Now it mattered. The door opened and Eleanor walked in. She looked different from the woman who'd stood in that courtroom 4 months ago. Same confidence, same sharp eyes, but softer somehow. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer instead of black. Her hair was down loose around her shoulders, and she was smiling. "Chloe," she said, crossing the room to embrace me, "these are extraordinary." She handed me a glass of champagne she'd brought, a bottle of course, and we stood together in front of courtroom 7. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Every day," I said, "but it doesn't hurt anymore. It feels like a story that happened to someone else." Eleanor nodded. "That's right, because that woman doesn't exist anymore. You're someone new." We clinked glasses. Rachel appeared beside us, throwing her arms around both of us. "3 survivors," she said. Eleanor looked confused. "3?" Rachel smiled. "I survived watching my best friend suffer for 9 years. You survived choosing justice over blood, and Chloe survived everything." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "To survivors," she said, raising her glass. "To survivors," Rachel and I echoed. We drank. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A news alert. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen, then handed it to Eleanor. "Former executive Jordan Pierce sentenced to 7 years in prison for wire fraud and embezzlement." Eleanor read it. Her face stayed neutral. "Are you okay?" I asked. She handed the phone back to me. "I'm fine. He chose this path. I hope the time in prison gives him a chance to reflect, to change. But that's not my responsibility anymore." I nodded. "I don't hate him. I don't feel anything about him anymore. Is that normal?" Eleanor smiled, a real smile. "It's healthy. Indifference is the opposite of love, Chloe, not hatred. You're free of him. Free." The word still felt new, still felt fragile, but it was true. I didn't think about Jordan anymore, not the way I used to, not with fear or anger or longing. He was just gone. A chapter I'd closed, a door I'd locked behind me. Rachel squeezed my hand. "How does it feel seeing your work on these walls?" I looked around the gallery, at the photos, at the people admiring them, at Eleanor and Rachel standing beside me. "It feels like I can finally breathe," I said. The evening wound down. Collectors had bought 3 of the photos, including one of the portraits of Eleanor. She'd insisted on buying it herself, but the collector had outbid her. "You're a terrible negotiator," I'd teased. "I'm an excellent negotiator," Eleanor had replied. "I just wanted you to have the sale." Now the gallery was empty, just me and the soft glow of the string lights overhead. I stood in front of courtroom 7 again, the empty chair, the harsh light. Someone had placed a red "sold" sticker on it while I wasn't looking. I touched the sticker, felt the smooth paper under my fingertips. I thought about the woman who'd sat in that chair 4 months ago, trembling, alone, terrified. She'd been so brave, braver than I'd given her credit for. She'd made a phone call that changed everything. She'd walked into that courtroom with nothing but hope and a thrift store dress. She'd trusted a woman she barely knew to fight for her, and she'd won. But she was gone now. That woman scared, small, controlled, she didn't exist anymore. And in her place was me, someone who could breathe, someone who could create, someone who knew her worth. I looked at my reflection in the gallery window. The city lights were starting to come on outside, turning the glass into a mirror. I looked different, not just older, lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight for so long I'd forgotten it was there, and now it was gone. I thought about something Eleanor had said once in that hotel room 2 days after the trial. The opposite of being trapped isn't freedom. It's becoming someone who was never trapped to begin with. I hadn't understood it then. I understood it now. Freedom wasn't about escaping. It was about transformation, about becoming someone who couldn't be caged in the first place. I turned off the gallery lights one by one, locked the door behind me, stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking up at the sign. Rebirth Photographs by Chloe Mitchell. My name, my work, my story. My phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. "You were glowing tonight, so proud of you. Love you, superstar." I smiled, typed back, "Love you too. Thank you for everything." Eleanor had texted too. "Dinner next week, my treat. You pick the place." I replied, "How about that Italian place you always talked about, the one you never had time to go to?" Her response came immediately. "Perfect, I have time now." I slipped my phone into my pocket and started walking home. Not Jordan's penthouse with its cold marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that felt more like a cage than a view. My home, the 3rd-floor walk-up apartment I'd rented with part of the settlement money. Small, just a bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a living room with south-facing windows that filled the space with light every afternoon. I'd turned the closet into a makeshift darkroom. It was cramped, and I had to develop prints in batches because there wasn't room for more than one tray at a time. But it was mine. Eleanor had offered to help me rent a proper studio space, a whole building if I wanted. But I'd said no, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I needed to do this myself, to build something that didn't depend on anyone else's money or approval or permission. I'd planted herbs on the windowsill, basil and rosemary and mint. They were thriving. Every morning I made tea and stood by the window watching the city wake up, breathing in the scent of growing things. Tomorrow I'd go back to the darkroom, start developing the negatives for the new series I'd been planning. Something about mothers-in-law and the families we choose, about light breaking through darkness, about second chances. Eleanor had already agreed to sit for a portrait. "But only if you make me look dignified," she'd said. "I'll make you look like yourself," I'd replied. "That's dignified enough." The walk home took 15 minutes. I passed the coffee shop where Rachel and I met every Sunday, the bookstore where I'd bought 3 new photography books last week, the corner where a street musician played violin every evening, his case open for tips. I dropped a $5 bill in as I passed. He nodded, smiled, kept playing. The city felt different now. Not smaller, not safer necessarily. Just mine. Like I belonged here. Like I had a right to take up space. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, stepped inside. The apartment smelled like coffee and developer fluid and the basil plant on the windowsill. It smelled like home. I made chamomile tea, the same kind Rachel always made for me, sat on the couch secondhand but comfortable and looked around. This was it. This was victory. Not the trial, not the money, not even the sold photographs or the gallery opening or the pride in Eleanor's eyes. Just this, the ability to sit in my own space, to drink tea without fear, to sleep in my own bed without wondering when the next fight would start, to breathe, to exist, to be free. That I'd learned was victory enough. I finished my tea, washed the cup, turned off the lights except for the small lamp by the couch, and I went to bed. My bed, in my apartment, in my life. I closed my eyes and fell asleep without fear. For the first time in 9 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. This is my story. 9 years of silence, 3 hours of justice, and 4 months of learning to breathe again. Looking back, I see the girl I was hopeful, naive, believing love could fix everything. I ignored every red flag because I was taught that marriage meant sacrifice. But here's what I've come to believe: sacrifice should never mean surrendering your soul. That's just my perspective, but it's one I wish I'd understood sooner. Don't be like me. Don't sign documents at midnight because you're afraid. Don't rationalize cruelty as stress. Don't stay silent when someone treats you like you're worthless. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any stranger's blade, and when the person who promised to protect you becomes your predator, family revenge isn't about hatred, it's about reclaiming the life they stole. Eleanor once told me something I carry every day. God gives us strength not to endure abuse, but to walk away from it. In my experience, God didn't put me in that courtroom to suffer. He gave me Eleanor Rachel and the courage to fight back. He reminded me that justice isn't revenge, it's restoration. Family betrayal taught me who I wasn't. Family revenge, the kind that happens in a courtroom with evidence and truth, taught me who I could become. Surviving family betrayal and seeking family revenge through legal justice showed me that you can reclaim your power without becoming what hurt you. And God, He taught me that healing isn't linear, but it's possible. If this story touched you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts and where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening when I needed to be heard. Please note, upcoming stories may include fictionalized elements for educational purposes. If that's not what you're looking for, feel free to explore content that better fits your preferences.